On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Ozan Bilgen. He is the CEO at Base64.ai. We're going to be talking about tech debt. Ozan's got a phenomenal background in technology. You'll go on LinkedIn to see his background, but today we're going to be talking about how much should you be building, right? How much tech debt's okay. Talk about your MVP. Under-engineering certain parts of your tech stack might be acceptable, and why you should not potentially over-engineer certain areas. And Ozan, thanks for being on. I'm excited to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So let's start off with two things. One, what does Base64.ai do? And I know you're the CEO, but what are you actually responsible for?
Sure. So Base64 is an artificial intelligence solution. It can process all types of documents. It can understand what type of document it's looking at, extract its key information, such as name and address and driver license number from a driver license, or total line items from an invoice, or any form detail from any possible form. It can process multi-page documents. It can process PDFs, Word documents, image files. So really, there's no limit what it can understand. It's practically giving an eye to a software so that it can see what's in those documents.
And then from a CEO perspective, I know you're responsible for a lot of stuff, but you're also a technologist. So where do those hats begin and where do they end?
As a CEO, I have to do everything at once. I feel like I'm very involved in technology. What we are building here at Base64.ai is what I had dreamed to have as a customer, and I couldn't find for many years. So at the end of the day, I end up building it myself.
There you go. And you're deep background in software engineering, so I'm sure the challenge is great. And we're going to be talking about tech debt. I know it gets covered. I think this is going to be an interesting angle. And in talking to you, you mentioned some of what goes into obvious software development and understanding of software architecture and the relationship to tech debt is a very tricky balance. Maybe you could start off by helping us understand when you mention in-depth knowledge of software architecture and that relationship to tech debt. What does that mean to you?
So at the end of the day, we don't have unlimited time or resources to build a project. We have to make decisions. And those decisions, we call them generally a prioritization. So we say these items we have to have in this product, and those things maybe, they're nice to have. So that's like one cut we do. But we didn't the items that we chose to start with. We cannot necessarily build in the beginning as if they're going to be at their final stage. Unlike maybe a civil engineering, software engineering, we constantly innovate and iterate through things as we see feedback from the users and as new technologies emerge. So the idea with software engineering is actually never to build the perfect product. It's to build a product that is extensible and that's live, so we can come in and change it and improve different parts of it. So the parts we chose to not do it in the first time is typically called a tech debt, which is a negative connotation, but it's actually typically a conscious way to say these things can wait, and I want to focus on those things. I want to use my energy and time in building the more important things from my perspective, so that the product can go faster and we can actually provide better value for our users. In essence, no software really lives for decades, hopefully. A good software is constantly rethought, rewritten, and with new technologies, new approaches, and new requirements. So tech debt is usually always a part of the equation when we build software.
Absolutely. I guess what you're talking about is interesting because you're saying, hey, this is going to be rewritten. Don't spend too much time. And a lot of times, if you're going to talk about tech debt, let's say at a startup, they're getting their MVP out. It's out. It's working enough to the level that they needed to continue the business, and they're taking those steps. Then why is that not being thrown away? Why is it still being built upon so that this notion of tech debt does have this negative connotation?
So when we build a product, we make a lot of decisions. Some of them is like, are we going to buy it or build it, right? So are we going to, get a third party, whether it's a service like basically for AI, or are we going to just do it ourselves entirely? And we didn't we're going to do this, angle of things. Then we have the decision of like how much we're going to invest in it. Do I have 2 engineers and 2 months, or 20 engineers and 20 months? That will change the architecture of the system. The other thing is you can get things from the ROI perspective. So you may get the 90% of the ROI within the first weeks, and then the remaining, the tail end of that 10% may take you months to build. So at that time, it comes to the technical leadership's decision, and they may choose to not build it right now. They may choose to not invest in that now. Maybe that project, maybe the solution that we have, the 90%, is good enough for time being. Maybe we will, need different approaches as we scale up, and that may require doing things differently in the ground up. But to get there is the problem. So that's the MVP problem, right? So if you build your V1 or V2 already in the first day, then you may never see the V1. So we have to do MVP. Having said that, obviously there are certain principles in our high-level architecture that should always be in place from the day zero. So going the MVP approach does not mean having no plan about it. It's making a conscious choice and understanding V1 is different goal, MVP is a different goal.
And that makes perfect sense. Obviously, you have time and money are the 2 constraints for a startup. You're limited in both, and you have to be super efficient with it. So I guess when you start going through the process of you finish out the first version of the product, is it a case that the roadmap is always adding new things to the top, especially if you're a young company? Sales is coming back with feedback because you want to sell more. You want to make, you need revenue. Sales is coming back with feedback where if we have this one change, we'll have another customer. That might become a priority. And then before you know it, you've built onto this slightly not perfect or not ideal base, and it's kind of slightly crooked. And then it becomes pretty expensive when you're making money. I guess the term, when it's not broke, don't fix it. It becomes more expensive to go back and go, hey, you know what? Long term, this isn't going to be the ideal for us, but we're making money. We have more roadmap for profit and revenue to be there. So that becomes, I guess, especially for a CEO or co-founder, that's got to be a very, very difficult decision.
Yeah, I think that is what separates most successful and unsuccessful businesses. So if you overly engineer a part and make it, let's just say, quote unquote perfect, which I don't think there's a perfect software 25 years hiding that. I haven't seen anything like that I would call perfect. Then what? What is the value that this is adding to us? So there are maybe so many different things that we haven't done because we really get obsessed about that part of the thing, and we actually did not deliver a solution to a customer. Solution from a customer perspective is it solves a problem, right? So to solve a problem, it should have a number of things. It should check a lot of boxes. It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't mean a solution doesn't check all the boxes, but does one thing good. That may not be actually a product from a customer's standpoint. So the understanding of where to invest in it, especially in a world of AI, where basically we are defining what AI is every day by building a product. it's not necessarily clear. So that's why innovating, iterating, and being agile is part of it has to be part of the development process. And that's where the tech debt comes from, right? So tech debt, if I may define it in one sentence, is is a delta between MVP and V1. That is your tech debt. And that is an iterative process. So once you reach V1 and you're going for V2, whatever that milestone be, there will be some delta, and there will be some decisions that was so great when we were with the V1, and then we got rid of all those tech debt of MVP. Well, they're gonna be the tech debt for V2. So it's never ending process of things, basically.
Absolutely. I guess the question that popped into my head is, this makes sense. That you get the MVP and between V1, obviously that's not always an exact science. Becomes an art. I'm sure there's a lot of blur lines of when that separation happens. I mean, when do you revisit that? I mean, is I guess a part of the process. You're building a product yourself at Bates64.ai. You're going through similar challenges. When do you go, hey guys, we need to leave time to make sure we're paying attention to how the architecture should change as we are seeing the momentum from MVP to what a potential V1 should be?
I think scale and compliance will be my priorities here. So if you want to, we process documents. We take PDFs, PNGs, Word documents, and so forth. So if you want to create a service that's going to process hundreds a day, is very different that you want to do the process you're going to create 100,000. Right. So we can call those maybe milestones, like maybe MVP, V1, and the V2 is like 100,000 a day. So the architectures you're going to build for them will be very different. And the same engineers, they can actually build the same of them. So it doesn't mean like, the MVP engineers are different than, V3 engineers. If they're tasked to do so, if they're equipped, and if they have resources they need, such as, other developers and so forth, they can build that. But if you build the V3 instead of like MVP, and that's not going to see the light of the day at the end of the day. So that's where the experience comes in. The people who need to decide where the MVP stand, they should definitely have a business mind, but also a very good technical mind to accurately estimate how much it's going to cost. Because it's very easy to, lose yourself in the labyrinth of ClickUps, where you don't know which one is more important, and that's where it's where you need strong technical leaders who would spend a lot of time in trenches and with coding and understand the ins and outs of building versus buying, or maybe just building that much. So that's I think that's the tricky part. That's the art part of this thing.
Do you think as you're going from the MVP to V1, you mentioned obviously your staff can code, and I guess the question would be is they can code it, but do you potentially need to bring others in that understand some of the, I guess, different types of architecture you're going to need? Because obviously, you might have people who help with the MVP that might not ever have seen scale. Are you envisioning, hey, these people know the system best, they're going to be able to help scale it? Or do you bring in outside help potentially to help with some of that scaling to V1?
Well, I feel very lucky to be surrounded by great engineers. However, I always believe it's about the ideas. It's not about careers or CVs. So we have a very open platform in our engineering team. Everybody, whether it's me as a CEO or an intern, we bring up our ideas, and we defend our ideas. We listen to each other, and the best idea wins. And I really like about that part within our team. So, what you're saying is true. There are some things that we learn with experience that certain we can foresee that certain things are not going to scale, and then we try to maybe improve it, beef it up. But there's also with experience, we know that we don't really need to build that hard. It will actually work as is with a much smaller MVP approach, and then we can monitor how the customers are using it and actually invest in the right places. Maybe if need be, entirely throw it away and not invest into that thing. So that also comes to experience too. You may most often see if more junior engineers getting extremely ambitious about it and thinking about too much into a problem, but not delivering the results. And that's not what we want in an engineering team too. So it can go both ways, depending on the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I guess what you just mentioned, the danger is, for a younger company who needs to move fast, taking the time to actually start, going through the finding the right sizing. You missed opportunity. I mean, that over analysis is going to lead to paralysis, and you may never actually, have the customers you need. I always joke with people, I think I mentioned it to you, when I first started this podcast, you start off thinking, oh my God, can my host, support all these, users? And you're like, well, I have no users. I'd have to produce the podcast first. It's a good problem to have if you become the next Joe Rogan. Not many people do, but if you do, hey, that's a great problem to solve. And I think with, you were mentioning, over analysis and kind of, making sure you use that budget, in terms of avoiding that over analysis and making sure you're moving quickly, how do you prevent the over analysis from kicking into a small team?
So it all goes to the budget, right? So what is the budget of this problem? How much money does this problem have for us to fix it? If it's a very big problem and a very rich problem that if you solve this, everything's going to change. Well, then we should definitely sit together and put the resources on that. But sometimes the problem may look very shiny, but the ROI might not be that much in terms of engineering or sales. Then we close the door for now. And that decision, although it might be very good for today, might be wrong next year. And that is the dynamic environment here. So this is why so much software engineering can be taught in school. There's a lot to be learned in the field by working and by trying, by learning from others, and by observing why people did that way. In essence, if Windows 11 was made in stuff like those, sure, maybe, but no computers will actually be able to run it. Then is that a better operating system than the tiny little DOS that comes in 3 floppy disks? So basically, it's very important, to understand, what the budget is, what the timeline is, when is the right time to make that move, and what is more important to work on today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're always the budget, the time, scope. Those are all, the keys to anything being successful, I think. And I was going to ask you. I've been asking a lot of leaders the question of, what's at the top of your mind when you're challenges you have that you would like a future leader to talk about. So it could be a topic, it could be a question you'd want a future leader to address. Is there anything that you have that comes to mind?
I think people should start thinking how the office will look like in 10 years. I think so much is changing so quickly. I'm 41 years old. I didn't grow up with a cell phone. They came up later in the 90s, right? Now, toddlers play with iPads. So we live in a generation that is hypermobile, and they are immersed with the technology, right? Now, we had the pandemic. I don't know, maybe you're still having it, and that changed everything about what offices or going to the office, or how the desks should be, or so forth. So we are fully remote right now, and we're super happy about it. So in this world now, silently a big player is coming, that is AI. So AI will take over the tasks that we are doing in the office. So then what kind of an office are we going to have? What sort of colleagues are we going to have? Are we going to have silicon colleagues or colleagues who live in the sky, in the clouds? And I think we are moving to this hybrid mode. And I think this is going to change so many things in the world. I'm not talking about just work, without talking employment. And we're talking how many people are going to be finding themselves an opportunity here. And that is the thing that's coming. And I think it's not even discussed, although it is very obvious this is how it's going to happen in 10 years or so.
Absolutely. 100%. I think that's a great discussion. I think somebody else mentioned, the office of the future is the top of their mind. I think they're an engineering leader I spoke to, and I definitely love to see if somebody listening to the podcast knows someone that knows that subject or themselves know that subject, because I think it'd be super interesting for a lot of people. You're right. That one thing that we're missing actually in this discussion is the current generation of kids that are very comfortable distance learning and learning on their own because they went through it. As they grow up and go into the workforce, it'll be nothing for them to continue some of that. Not that they're not going back to school, but some of their formative years, some of the, for a year or two, they're used to it, right? To your point, will they care to actually sit next to anybody? Or they're like, yeah, whatever, I'm here, there, it doesn't matter. I just got to get the job done. So good question. Ozan, if somebody wants to reach out to you on anything you've talked about, if they want to pick your brain, if they want to talk to you about the company or anything at all, what's a good way of getting a hold of you?
Well, base64.ai is also our domain, so you can always visit that. And my email is ozan@base64.ai. So always happy to have a follow-up conversation.
Okay, I will definitely make sure we have those links out there. Again, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing. Interesting subject. I love your viewpoints. So I appreciate it very much.
Great to be here. Thanks, Amir.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. If you know someone that can talk about how the office of the future will look, especially with the impact of the pandemic on younger children or just younger people, and how that's going to skew things in the future, I'd love to have you on. Reach out to me. It'd be a great topic. If the podcast has been useful, please share it. That's how we've been growing, and I think everyone does. That's it for now. Thank you and goodbye.